Hey there, Live Like Your Nail Color gals. Relationships are essential, right? Relationships help us get things done. Relationships help us get through tough times. And especially as women, our closest relationships have a tremendous impact on how we see ourselves and how much hope and resilience we have in our everyday lives. That's why I'm doing an episode miniseries on women's essential relationships. Together, we're exploring our relationships as adult women with aging parents, romantic partners, adult children, and female friends. Having been on this planet for several decades, we've had shit happen in these relationships. How have these moments shaped us? And at this point, what can we do to use those moments to become stronger, healthier, and happier? We kicked off the series talking about what we can gain, yes, gain, from a romantic relationship breakup. Dr. Sherry Yoder calls them breakup breakthroughs. It was so good, so helpful. You just got to listen if you haven't. Today, we're exploring your relationship with your parents who are aging, and you're now in a caregiving role. I'm there, and so many of you are or will be. Honestly, I used to dread this whole thing, but I'm moving into seeing this as a beautiful time, though definitely not easy. Even if you aren't currently caregiving for aging parents, chances are you know a friend who is. So listen for a few nuggets to encourage and support them. Trust me, it will mean so much. But first, before we dive into our conversation, have you taken my quiz to determine your nail color persona? All you have to do is go to livelikeyurnailcolor.com, answer a few questions, and in your results, discover your specific nail color persona. There's 5, your built-in strengths, and how to tap into those strengths when shit happens. Again, go to livelikeyurnailcolor.com. Now, let's get to today's episode.
Tired of so much chip happening? Discouraged by so much downer news? Weary from chronic crisis? Don't let the chips keep you down. Welcome to the Live Like Your Nail Color podcast, where the tips of your fingers and toes are ready to inspire you to not give up and to keep creating the business, career, and life you want. In each episode, we flip the chip and let our fun nail color with that crazy fun name cheer us on to remember our strengths, embrace the power of choice, see life as an adventure, and know resilience is only a touch-up or change-up away. Get ready for a good time and a good laugh with your host, Mary Foley.
Welcome back, Live Like Your Nail Color gals. Hard to believe, but it's been almost a year since I moved back to my hometown to be within a few miles of my aging parents. You know, they really are amazing. They're 87 and 88 years old, living independently and doing fairly well. But still, time marches on and takes a toll, because then it happened. Earlier this year, my mom fell and broke her hip, which threw me into a whole world of caregiving. Today's Gal Pal describes it like this. Dive in. The water is, well, it's choppy and freezing, and you can't see land in any direction. I certainly felt that way, especially at the beginning. And while each caregiving journey is unique, there's one certainty. You will face unfamiliar tasks and situations, and there's no training manual that comes with it. Not only are you thrown into the sea of confusion, trying to desperately decipher what to do next, you're faced with what your relationship with your parents now looks like. And they're doing the same with you, by the way. Today's gal pal, Pam Reynolds, author of Caregiving with Confidence, takes the guesswork out of caregiving. And Pam draws on her extensive experience, both personally, which I want her to share, and professionally. She's a certified age living care manager, a certified professional gerontologist, and a certified dementia practitioner. She has a diverse vocational background that includes assisted living facility and nurse home management, as well as owning a company of her own that helped people age in place at home. Pam, welcome to the Live Like Your Nail Color podcast.
Oh, thank you, Mary. It's such a pleasure to be here this morning.
I'm so glad you're here. You know, this is a topic that I know isn't the easiest to cover or the easiest to talk about, but particularly women around my age and at this age and stage of life, it's so pertinent. It's so pertinent. It doesn't mean it's restricted to that, but certainly a lot of the gals listening are in their 40s and 50s and 60s, and this is part of our reality. Now I want to get to that, but before we dive into that, I always ask my nail color guests, what's your nail color persona, and did it nail you? So we get to know a little bit about you. So what is your nail color persona, Pam, and did it nail you?
Oh, Mary, this was so fun. So my nail color persona is the solid sister. So
Nice. Okay.
yeah. So I would say I relate to that, the steady, kind of reliable pillar for your friends and family. And I think a lot of caregivers can probably relate to being in that role. And I have found myself kind of being the person that everyone turns to for support and advice when the chips fall. I think that's what you say. No, do I
Yeah,
get that
that's
right?
right. Shit happens. And this is one of those in life where it's like, right. My mom fell.
Yeah,
It happens, right? I mean, yeah.
yeah, yeah. But the other thing I've come to realize as I mature is that I need other solid sisters around me. We're meant to do life together, and it's okay sometimes to show weakness and lean on others for support. And so I think I'm an evolving solid sister. I'm learning the power of community as well. So
An evolving solid sister. I'm going to remember that. That might like the next iteration of what's your nail color?
right.
Now, do you have a fave color that you like to wear as a solid sister? And did that, the description of that say anything about you?
Yeah, I went with pink when I chose the color on the test.
Yeah.
But generally I'm either pink or I'm the naked. So if I have time to go get a professional manicure, this is about a week old here, but I get a light pink or more of a neutral color. My favorite, I own my own. I take my own with me. It's called Baby Take a Vow by Opie, and that's my that's my go-to. That's what I'm wearing now, but I did this one myself. So if I have time for a manicure, I'm usually have pink or some kind of nice neutral. Then I think the description was pretty spot on. Modest, sensible, gets along easily with others. I think that's pretty much me. But I'm also kind of like the mullet when it comes to my nails, like business in the front, party in the back, because my toes will usually have some kind of sparkly or bright color that I'd never put on my fingernails. So yeah, I might have a little trick up my sleeve once in a while.
That's so hilarious. But, yes, I know the mullet, right? If you're like, what are you talking about? Like, imagine the bad mullet haircuts from the 80s, right? Which were like short on top, but then were long in the back and even kind of shaved some, like,
That's right.
right on the sides, right? So that's
A
why
little
it's like
wild in the back.
business
Though.
in the front,
Yeah.
party in the back. It is again and again. It is I've seen this with, gal pals who have been guests on the Live Like Your Nail Color podcast. And then beyond that, which is, we kind of go mild on the fingers, but wild on the toes,
Right.
Like, so which one is our, which one's our true authentic self? I really think
that's right.
toes.
I'm pretty sure it is.
We're a little hesitant to bring it out in public a little bit more, right? We say it's practical because then you don't see as much of the chip. I'm like, it ain't that about that. That might be true practically or functionally, but really the reality is we're a little bit more cautious of showing,
There you go.
So, all right. So I appreciate both, though. I realize both. All right. So knowing that, let's get started and understand, because if you're reliable and you are, you're the solid sister next to us, particularly as a caregiver, that's the kind I want, like you said. And I found that starting in my mid 50s, I start hearing the term caregiver a whole lot more. So I want to start with the basics because you're the expert. What does caregiver really mean?
Oh, excellent question. I have found that many people who are caregivers don't even realize it. And in fact, I think I start the book with this subject because identifying as a caregiver, that's the first step. It's one of the first hurdles that we have to overcome. And once we identify that way, then we can learn to accept and even embrace that role that we have. And for many people, it's one of many roles. So it's just kind of, you're hesitant to embrace another role and not put on another hat.
Yeah. Get that.
But but the reality is many of us are walking it out just without really accepting it. And so a caregiver is, I mean, it's really anyone that supports another person, whether that be physically, emotionally, financially. And the thing about this is that it can start really minimal, but snowball very quickly. And so I call it the slippery slope of caregiving. It really sneaks up on us. And it sounds like that's kind of, with your story, Mary, is, it kind of just starts with, just check-ins and kind of routine visits and making sure things are okay. And it just, as over time, it can really start to pile up. And we don't even really recognize what's happening because we're so close to it.
Yeah, I love that definition because I thought about it. I thought caregiver, someone who gives care. And there's a lot of different ways we can give care.
Yes.
I mean, really every mom has been a caregiver, right?
Absolutely.
Is a caregiver. But I know that we often associate the term with aging, parents or loved ones or those in our lives, right? That we're doing something for. And of course, I'm specifically talking about my mom, but really I'm caring in ways and supporting my dad, who is really like the direct on-site moment-to-moment caregiver, right? So it really does take a team or take a village. I get the slippery slope, but it's not, that sounds like a bad thing. But the reality is that as they get older, and they will, just like I'm getting older, predictably the care needs will increase.
That's right.
It's just as when we were a baby. And I thought of this, it really hit me one day. And instead of this, oh, I've given up my whole life and oh my gosh, and which by the way, I haven't. I think that's an important thing not to completely do. But as I thought about, okay, yes, my life has fundamentally changed, but and I'm giving far more time and attention there. I thought, they brought me into this world, and for the first 18 years of my life, minimum, they gave up their lives for me. They did it voluntarily, and they wanted to do it. I mean, certainly as an infant, I was completely at their mercy, kind of a thing. And I thought, why not at the end of their lives, I get to pay that back. I get to return the favor, right? And it's not about weights of, I did as much, they did as much. It's just simply about recognizing what they have done for me and that I have an opportunity to do it for them. And with that shift, it's really helped me a lot. And that doesn't mean I don't have a whole lot to learn about how to do this in a healthy way. But it certainly helped with that.
Yeah. Yeah. It's just a hard shift to make.
Yeah.
For both the caregiver and the care recipient. I mean, it is certainly true that we were taken care of by our parents when we were small, and now that role is reversed. But there's so many dynamics to that. There's so many layers to that. And that role reversal that you end up in, it's not easy for the parents to accept that. You don't. It's not natural, right? Like they're the parent and they are the one that's supposed to be taking care of you. And it's very, very hard to make that role reversal and to allow your children to start stepping in and taking care of you. And so that's where we have to be very respectful and careful with that dynamic shift and recognize that we're not parenting our parents. I feel like, I don't know, I have you hear that term all the time, but I kind of take issue with it because they're still our parents. They still lived, decades before us and raised us and taught us and they have so much to still offer. And, we just have to, we are supporting them, but we're not parenting them. We still have to be respectful of that role.
So I want to ask from your experience, just for everyone listening, is there a typical age that we start, that our aging parents start to need care? Can we kind of, I mean, mine have been late 80s and that's pretty amazing, but I don't think that's the usual starting point.
Well, I get that question all the time. When do we need to start doing this planning? What is the sweet spot? And I'll risk sounding too much like a lawyer with my answer, but it depends.
Okay, yeah. You're off the hook to have a specific number, but okay, so why does it depend?
Well, I mean, seriously, there's no time that's too early to start preparing because crisis can strike at any time. And the idea is to get ahead of that, to get upstream and to put a plan in place before the crisis start. Married people don't do this. I mean, every family I talk to is in the midst of a crisis when they call, and
Right.
they have not planned. And so that is human nature to not worry about something until it becomes an issue.
Right.
But to be prepared for the worst and hope for the best is really, really the goal here. And so we want to be able to take time with our decisions and walk out a plan at our own pace, and be able to make educated choices. And that's so much better than functioning from a purely reactive stance. And so I just think that there's really no time. It's too early to start at least thinking about these things, having conversations. We at the law firm where I work at, we give presentations about doing basic power of attorney and advance directive as soon as you turn 18. As soon as you're an adult, put those documents in place, because no one else can speak for you when you're incapacitated and you're a legal adult.
Yeah.
And so of course estate planning looks a lot different for a 50, 60, 70-year-old than an 18-year-old, but there are still basic pieces that really every competent adult should have. So yeah, there is no sweet spot, but the sooner the better.
So you also weren't prepared. You had a crisis. How did you become a caregiver? What's your personal story?
Well, my initial introduction to caregiving was actually as a child, as a teenager. My parents had gotten divorced when I was around 12 or 13, and I lived with my dad most of the time. And his mother, my paternal grandmother, was aging. My grandfather had passed away, and she was living alone. And she had a few medical issues. She had had breast cancer and um, some other medical problems. But ultimately, it was Alzheimer's that really made everything go awry. And so, just watching my dad, along with my aunt, who was actually a registered nurse and had cared for my uncle before he passed away. My dad and my aunt, they did their best and came together. And my aunt did a lot of the more hands-on things that you think of as a caregiver, right? She was the nurse, so she did the bathing and the dressing and things like that. Where my dad handled the bills and did the grocery shopping and the finances and things like that. And so I just remember watching them work together and try to piece together a plan and try to divvy up the task and keep this going and keep her in her home as long as they possibly could. And my dad he just really didn't have a good understanding of what dementia was and what was happening to my grandmother. He saw it as um, that she was being finicky or disagreeable. He was really struggling with her cognitive decline, even though her doctor was telling him what was going on. I just think it was a lack of understanding, lack of education, that was frustrating for him. And so ultimately, she did end up needing to go into full-time care. It just wasn't safe for her to be alone, even with their support. She actually ended up driving her car through her front porch.
Oh,
Um,
wow.
yeah, which was kind of the final straw there. So, and even then, I don't think my dad was like, oh, what is she doing? I'm not sure that he understood that this was not really her fault. But nonetheless, so she went into a memory care facility, and similar to your story, spent the last 7 or 8 years of her life just in this cognitive decline state in a long-term care facility. And I just really, it really resonated with me. I wanted to find a way to get involved in the lives of people that were helping their aging parents. Just from that very young age, I just knew that I was called into helping people navigate that process. And so that was my first family experience with caregiving. And now as an adult, I've gone on to other caregiving experiences. My husband and I were caring for my father-in-law until he passed away last year. And also now I'm kind of in the thick of it with my own mom. So it has evolved over the over the course of my lifetime. But again, professionally called into this line of work and worked, with hundreds of maybe thousands of families from long-term care to home health care, just trying to help them navigate those different systems. So,
wow, I was thinking you have been exposed to this and had a front row seat ever since you were like 12, 13, 14 years old, sounds like.
yeah.
And that's something that most of us don't have. And boy, I love it. No wonder you can say caregiving with confidence. Right? You get confidence out of experiences and competence, right? And learning and doing and saying what works. And not everybody's story is the same, but you start to see patterns and you start to see things that are strategies and techniques that do work again and again. So what inspired you to write your book, Caregiving with Confidence?
Yeah, writing a book is not for the faint of heart.
It's not.
I wouldn't recommend it.
I'd recommend it if it's on your heart. Okay, but it's not to do, right?
Right. It's not something to go into lightly. It was something, again, just a calling that I felt, because I heard countless times from families that they would just say, I wish there was a handbook that I could have had in the beginning that would have given me everything I needed. And just I would just see the same crises, like you said, play out over and over again. And people would always say, "Oh, if I just had you 5 years ago, if I just had met you." And obviously I can only be in so many places at once, right? And I can only help so many families individually, but I just knew that, or I thought that by writing a book, I could reach a broader audience and arm them with information that I had learned from experience and help them just make a bigger impact on the lives of caregivers. And I, like them, I feel like the same way. I wish I had this tool back then, right? Like I wish my family had this book. And so it's a legacy in that way as well.
That's great. I appreciate you writing it. Seriously. I know there's other books about caregiving that's out there, but I love that it's like you said, it's like a manual. You get very practical very quickly in it. And in fact, you have 5 overall tips, you say, the top tips for those who are beginning on their caregiving journey. Yeah. There are gals listening right now who are at the beginning, like me. Or they're fearful that they're going to start soon. Okay.
Right.
Back to my hometown to be close to my parents. And that was actually 9 months ago. I didn't know when they would need help. I knew they needed some, but I didn't know there would likely be some precipitating event. And I was like a little bit holding my breath. And then it happened. Right. So there are other gals listening who are exactly in that same spot. So what are these 5 tips for people who are at the beginning of their caregiving journey?
Yeah, I start the book out with that just to give people kind of a snapshot of how they need to approach this. And I use the acronym GUESS. So it starts with the G is get organized. Disorganization is, it's just really the root cause of an array of problems for caregivers. And just, helping or trying to get your care recipient to get their legal and financial and medical affairs in order. It'll just be a huge relief to you later. So that's the G, get organized. U is understanding your care recipient. So it's just getting your arms around the most, the immediate and long-term needs of the person you're caring for. We're going to frequently be in positions where we have to provide information and answer questions to the professionals as we're caring for our loved ones. So, having a good understanding of their situation, of their care needs, will just better enable you to advocate and care for them. The E is educate yourself. So that just means research and find ways to increase your knowledge and, on their disease process and on effective caregiving strategies in advance, just so that you can know what to expect later. Set boundaries is the first S, And that's just being realistic about how much of your time and energy that you can really expend in caregiving, as we talked about earlier, right? So many caregivers have multiple roles, jobs, other people who depend on them. So it's just vital to kind of go in with those expectations, setting limits, and just communicating those limits to your other family members, your care recipient, and so forth. And then the final S is seek support. This is, I mean, so critical. Just don't tackle this alone, right? Ask family or friends to help, take on specific tasks to ease the burden. If you don't have local family support, reaching out to your community, putting support system in place. It's vital to put those pieces in place ahead of time, so you have the right people to call on when you need it.
That's a great structure. I love how it takes the guesswork out of how to get started. I was looking at these 5 things going, if I want to start with that first one, get organized, I could stop and go, well, they're not going to give me that information, or that's touchy, right? And it might be, but at least I could start to understand what is the information that I need. But everything else, understanding the care recipient, what their immediate needs are, their long-term needs, I could ask them. I could start to pursue that also with the doctors that they have, educating myself, setting boundaries, seeking support. I could start getting some of those other things in place. That feels very empowering when you say that.
Well, it does. It breaks it down into, actionable steps that are realistic, and they do take time, but that's why you're reading this book. I mean, that's why you're planning ahead, is to start setting these things in motion. And, as I said in the book, I mean, you have to take care of the fire first, right? So if you're jumping into things in a crisis, then first things first, put the fire out. But then, our human nature is to go, when the fire alarm is not sounding, our human nature is to ignore it. That's okay. I don't have to worry about that right now. It's not on fire. But use the breathing room, to take a step back and look at these other areas, and what else can you do now to set yourself up for a better experience when the next crisis does hit.
Okay, so note to self, Mary. Okay, we're in a kind of a stabilized spot right now with my mom, and there's a part of me that wants to just go, okay, now I can do these things that has nothing to do with caregiving, like, the rest of my life. And now I'm like, no, actually, this is the time that I can breathe and
take advantage of it. Yeah.
Right. Okay. So note to self. Well, in fact, that makes me think about, when my mom suddenly fell and had hip replacement, I did have a lot of questions. And immediately I had a lot of questions. It was the acute thing. I had a lot of questions. I didn't have a lot of answers. And it wasn't just about this, her physical health and the surgery. It was now I started thinking about so many other areas that get impacted. Whether she made it through that surgery, she didn't. I mean, there was that kind of scenario we had to all think about, even if we didn't want to. So I'm trying to get a handle on what areas overall are the most important, and given your experience, what are some of these chunks of overall areas, and what should we focus on first, and why? Because once we get these the 5 overall kind of strategy tips and that mentality shift, I got to get into the logistics of financial or legal and physical, that's emotional. I mean, what are those areas? You've got the experience. I want to learn from you. Okay. I want to fast forward the whole process.
Well, first things first, and that's the care of your mom, making sure she's taken care of, right? So jumping in, getting a handle on the physical and medical needs, because things are different now. She's had a hip replacement. Her abilities are different. Her stamina might be different. Things have changed. She might have a new routine with therapy. She might have new medications, things like that. So we got to kind of focus there, make sure the immediate needs are met, make sure that your mom is getting the health care that she needs. And, by the way, that doesn't mean you are going to be the one doing it all, right? And so sometimes people think as a caregiver that means they have to be doing all the tasks themselves. And as caregivers, we have to ensure that our care recipients' needs are met, but that doesn't mean actually physically doing it all ourselves necessarily. It just means making sure it's getting done. And so, I mean, caregiver burnout is like a whole nother topic.
Oh yeah,
but,
I know that. I don't want to have to know too much about that, but I understand it. I was actually thinking when you were saying that, two things. One is that this isn't just about the physical medical needs of my mom. It's also considering my dad at the same time.
Absolutely.
And I know a lot of times if both of your parents are alive and they're together, but even if they're not, but if they're both alive, and one starts to have physical medical issues,
absolutely.
The other one, if they are immediately right there doing any kind of support, they can go down fast too. So we're trying to be cognizant of both. Right. And that the other thing I thought of was when you said you don't have to do it all yourself. I was like, my project management skills are going to come in handy now.
There you go.
Career, right?
That's right. And really that's how we have to approach it. I say this all the time. I mean, we use consultants and professionals in so many different areas of our life. I mean, who goes out to try to build a house for themselves, without hiring an architect and an engineer and a general contractor and so forth? Nobody. I mean, unless that's your profession, right? So, it's why are you tackling this without that team in place that can guide you? And so we shouldn't expect ourselves to just become experts overnight in all these different areas. And yes, I mean, caregiver burnout is a real thing. And when we try to tackle all these tasks and complete them all ourselves, that's what we're setting ourselves up for. And so so I mentioned that for a reason, because it's a very risky, way to kind of approach this. So anyhow, just making sure that you have your arms around the care needs of your mom and your dad, and how to best assist them with that. That's your current fire, right? So I wrote the book in such a way that you can jump into whatever category you're currently dealing with, put the fire out, and then step back and take a look at the bigger picture. And so in this scenario you describe, I think, it's a really good time to start thinking about the environment and whether or not your parents are going to need accommodations to stay where they are long term. I mean, every single family, every client I've interfaced with the exception of, I don't know, I can probably count on one hand how many times it's been the opposite, but they want to stay and age in place in their home.
Yeah.
That's their primary goal. I don't want to leave this house unless I'm leaving in a body bag. I mean, that's, I can't even tell you how high on the list that is for most people I interface with who are aging. And we just have to think about, okay, if that's your goal, how do we make that happen? And what changes do we need to make now in advance to make that wish come true? And, we'll do everything we can to make that happen. But we also need a plan B, right? We need to start talking about, what if the chips fall and this is no longer possible? What do we do? How are we going to pivot? And so those are the conversations that, you need to start having when things are stable, as to what does this look like long term. And, when it comes to falls, I mean, you mentioned your mom had a fall.
Right.
The primary risk factor of falling is a previous fall.
Right. That's right. And the likelihood is that she will fall again.
The likelihood is high. Yeah. I mean, once an aging person falls, it's the statistics are there. It's very likely they will fall again. So we have to start looking at the environment and really start making fall prevention a priority, because falls, it's one of the leading causes of death among aging people. So really, it's safety. Safety becomes a real priority at this stage of looking at, okay, is aging in place really feasible? How do we make it as safe as possible? And then what's our plan B if we can't do that?
Got it. That's kind of where we're at right now. And I would say then immediately with that becomes, well, what can we afford? Or I should say the financial picture, because part of that aging in place, which sounds great, and I support that, is that, well, that may easily include home health care, in addition to modifications. Okay, so the modifications can come to the house and it's kind of one and done, right? Kind of a thing. But then the home health care can be a ongoing and increasing need, and then it's a financial need. And
Absolutely right.
and we got, we get down to real numbers and then how much asset you have and that kind of a thing. So for us, financial quickly comes right after considering the environment. Would that make sense?
It's a part of the conversation. I mean, they have to go hand in hand because, you can dump tens of thousands or even hundreds of thousands of dollars into a home to make it more livable, long-term age in place, friendly, but then you have no cash. All your equity is tied up in the house, and so you have to. How does that look? What can we do? And so, for a lot of aging adults, their primary asset is their home, and so you have to consider that, and how do we leverage that, or are we able to leverage that to pay for care? And if not, how are we going to do that? Because I'm here to tell you that the long-term care funding sources that are government funded are not, they don't favor aging in place. They favor the facility model. And there's been some shift in that in the last few years, but it's still way behind in terms of supporting people to age in place at home. It's very much designed to have people enter long-term care facilities and pay for them to live there on a long-term basis. So aging in place and counting on, sources like Medicare and Medicaid to pay for that is not really realistic in most places in the country. And not only that, but most people didn't plan. They counted on their Social Security, and they didn't plan well for financially for end of life. So the resources just simply aren't there. So then what does that look like? If you have to count on Medicaid, if you have to use government funding, then what are the realistic options? And I say all the time, money gives you options, but pre-planning also gives you options, right? If your options are going to be limited, making the plans in advance is going to give you the better options of what is out there. So that's it. I think the financial part, and I strategically end the book with the financial piece, so it's fresh on the reader's mind, because that's kind of a conversation that has to be woven into the whole thing.
Yeah, boy, what you have said really resonates. One of the moments during that acute time where after my mom broke her hip was that she left the hospital and then went to a rehab facility.
Mm-hmm.
There were no rehab beds in our immediate town, which, by the way, has lots of retirees, and we have some facilities. So that was eye-opening. They're full. So we had to go to a place that was about 15, 17 miles away. All right, not too bad. I'm not complaining about it.
Very fortunate, yeah.
But here's the thing. They said, oh, yes, there's a bed. And my dad made the decision, all right, we'll take it. So she gets transferred to that, which means that the hospital and their vehicle have to take her safely from the hospital to the facility. And then, we meet her there in our own cars. They kind of whisk her in, take her to this room.
Mm-hmm.
It was not on the rehab side of this facility.
Mm-hmm.
It was on the nursing home convalescent side of the facility. Now, not every facility has both, right? But this one did. This was quote unquote her bed. And we're like, this was not what we were told. So that's what the shocker was. Okay. The shocker was we're expecting one thing, we're getting another. Now we're feeling kind of stuck. And they said, well, as soon as a bed opens up on the rehab side. Well, then I learned, and we learn, and now it's like 5:00 in the evening and stuff. So she's going to be in this facility with not the same level of attention and care that we were anticipating as a rehab patient, but instead the level and care that's going to be given to someone who's in a nursing home. And she was sharing a room, and it was just, so I stayed with her all night.
Yeah.
It was one of the most scary and nights of my life.
Eye-opening. Yeah.
And eye-opening. That was the thing. And what I realized was I was immersed in the situation of, this is what it will be like in a nursing home.
Yeah.
And many people, and by the way, it wasn't awful. It wasn't great. It was something that I went, I'm now going to want to do everything I can for my mom to limit or to not have any days in this kind of environment. And here was the thing that really broke my heart. One of the nurses' aides said to me as I was asking her questions, and she said, a lot of our residents, that's what they call them, of course, residents, don't call them patients because they live there, residents,
Right.
never have anyone visit them.
That's right.
And
Yeah.
I thought, we've heard that, but when you're in the middle of it and you see these individuals, and some of them they're not all there, they're just not. Some of them, my mom's quote unquote roommate could not speak. She could only utter sounds. Something had happened. Maybe she had a stroke. I don't know. She could move, but it was very, she was very bent over and had a, what's called a rollator that she could move around and stuff. But then I saw pictures on the wall that I'm sure her family had put up when she was a younger woman, and she was a vibrant woman. And I thought, oh, how sad it is of so often the end of life. It's not pretty. And there's nothing for her that she quote earned it, right? It's just what has happened. And it could easily have happened to my mom. My mom could have a stroke any moment, and this could be her situation. And I say that because out of let's all have our eyes open as to what if we do nothing and we do not plan and we do not try to make an attempt to understand what is ahead of us, what's the possibility. This is what we get plopped into likely.
Right.
And I would say that this is something that we can do something to have a better end of life experience for our those who are ahead of us in age, but how about ourselves as well, right?
Right.
It really was an eye opener, and I didn't know necessarily what all to do with it, honestly.
Yeah.
What next actions, which is why I love your book. It gives kind of a framework and it gives a guide, and you can get to that, but it gave me a big reason why.
A why. Yeah, that's right. And that's why I emphasize the plan B, because you can have, this perfect plan in your mind of aging in place and being independent and, up until your last days and passing away peacefully in your own bed. And I pray that happens, for you. I really do. But the reality is one fall, a stroke, the things that you mentioned, they can happen to any of us at any time. And if we don't have a plan B, if we don't know what's coming, you're right that we're at the mercy of the system and what's available and how Medicare and Medicaid work. And so, even if you never plan to use it, but most people don't, let's think about these things. You can get on waiting lists in advance at the top tier facilities, even if it's Medicaid, that's going to be your funding source. If you plan ahead and you go, you have these conversations and you're in communication with the administrators and you get your ducks in a row, you got your paperwork done, you can have a choice, and maybe it's not going to be the Taj Mahal of assisted living facilities if you paid $20,000 a month, but it'll be the best option of what's out there. And you might not have to wait for a bed or go 20 miles from your family, or even worse, right? I mean, I used to do that for a living, and I would see people get shipped out, from here to Pennsylvania, 4 or 5 hours away from their loved ones, because that's the only bed that was available. And so I understand you don't want to go down that path, but facing it as a potential reality and lining up your options ahead of time, if it comes to that, is going to give you a better experience. You're going to have more options than if you just wait for the crisis to hit and take what's available.
Well, I was reading in preparation for our conversation some articles, and I will say that I can't remember the exact reference of this, so you can verify this or not. But here's my big takeaway on statistics. Right now, we have something like 2 to 3% of the population in the United States that need this kind of care. But in a good 15 to 20 years, it's going to double. And that's just because of our aging population, right? And so I thought, oh my gosh, when I heard again and again the lack of, or we need more beds, rehab beds, and we need more home health caregivers, and we need more facilities. And I thought, this is now. it's
Yes.
only going to be worse,
Right.
in the future. And of course, it can be an area of growth for, businesses and companies to build these kind of facilities. But to just
Also a
go,
huge
oh,
burden.
right.
Yeah.
It's an overall challenge for our society.
Yeah.
And I don't think the United States is alone in that, because
Right.
they're, across the world, the population has grown and is aging. So, one of the things, though, I want to go back to some of these categories that you say, hey, start where. So we've covered physical and medical. That was
Hmm.
one. Look at that one. Environment, financial. This whole idea of aging as place is great at home, but there may be a time where it doesn't make sense
Hmm.
given the level of care. One of the things that I've seen as an advantage, and we've already talked with my dad about this, he gets it, but it is that because of where my mom's at from a medical, physical, and cognitive point of view, she doesn't get nearly the amount of social interaction that she
Hmm.
used to. And she is a social creature. Like, she responds and her whole face lights up when she's interacting with somebody. What about this social component? Is that it? Is that one of your big areas to consider and look at?
It absolutely is. I think we have to approach that from a very realistic standpoint of who the person we are caring for, who they are, and how they live their life. And someone like your mom, who was a social butterfly and got energy from being around people, probably isn't going to flourish if she's isolated and, you know uh, lonely in her older age. And so we just have to try and do our best to meet them where they're comfortable and provide the level of social support that they've had in the past. And there's a flip side to that, because there's some people who aren't that way and don't get a lot of enjoyment out of socialization, and we try to force them into it in their older age, right? And so it's like, well, they never were the social butterfly, and now we're saying, oh, move into this nursing home and go do all the activities and make a bunch of friends, and that's probably not realistic. So I just kind of start with that, because you have to think about who they are as a person and what their social needs are. But then we do our best to try to meet them, and there are ways to do that with the age and place model. It's just by keeping them doing our best to keep them connected to the social sources that they have lived with in their lives, reaching out to, as they become more homebound, reaching out to the groups and organizations that they were a part of, and asking, just, I mean, simply asking sometimes is making them aware, hey, my mom can't get out there as much, or she's not able to participate, like she used to. There's plenty of groups and organizations that are more than happy to do what they can to help her continue to participate, or to send, people out into the community to visit and to provide support. And so sometimes it's just raising our hand and saying, hey, can you do this? And naturally that does dwindle, becomes harder to maintain connected. And so moving into a senior living type community, it's just kind of finding the sweet spot of what works for them. Activities can be widely varied in these communities, and just finding, a routine and a schedule that works for them, and activities that they actually enjoy. Don't be afraid to talk to the activities director and say, hey, mom really enjoyed doing this. Maybe some other people in the community would like that. Let's try it out. Let's try to get a group going. Activities directors would trust me, they would love that, because they're always looking for new ways to engage their community. And so speaking up and raising your hand and saying, how can I help get this started, or what can I bring in to add to your activities calendar? Just getting involved in that way, rather than just looking at what's there and saying, oh, that doesn't work for mom.
All right, Pam. So now we've talked about social. That's a whole component. And I know there's like 5 big categories. So
Yeah.
that are in your book. And so we've talked about, I think, 4 of them. Physical and medical was 1. Environment is 2. And like, where you're living, basically,
Yeah.
right? Financial is another big one. Social, we just talked about. What's the last one? Because I'm trying to think of what other areas are left.
So the last one is the first one I start with in the book, and there's a reason for that. It's advocacy. And I start there because along with identifying as a caregiver, we also have to identify as an advocate. The two are synonymous. And it's honestly overcoming so many hurdles in the caregiving process involves a lot of advocacy, speaking up and asking questions and probing a little bit further, and sometimes saying no, that's not going to work for us. Just being prepared to speak on behalf of your care recipient is huge. So many people, I think, approach caregiving from a kind of a meeker standpoint, just taking the professional's word for it and just going through the process without asking questions. And I advocate strongly against that. You have to be looking. There's a lot of places where you're a care recipient. There's loopholes where they can fall through, and so you really have to be vigilant and watching for those things. And so this also encompasses the legal side, right? So getting those documents in place, setting up the power of attorney and the advance directive, and getting involved with their medical, financial, and legal affairs on the front end to the extent that you can, so that you can help manage those things along the way.
You know what? I was wondering. You know what? I can totally see that care recipients, particularly if they're older, being taken advantage of.
Absolutely.
Even in my short time thus far, so easy when you say you kind of get into, quote, the system, right? And they can move you along to their system, and you really do have to be an advocate. And that's one of, and again, I think of my reason why. Why do I want to even do that? Because I want to have a better situation than by default she may have been given to, and I just don't think that's necessarily, quote, good enough. But it's also, I think about, well, it's kind of part of my responsibility, right? It's not the system's responsibility to be guiding the whole thing. It's really part of my responsibility. Is this also why you have gotten into elder care law at this point in your career?
Yes, it really is. I mean, like I said, I just almost 20 years working in the senior healthcare industry, just seeing the same crises play over and over again in the same situations where elders do fall through the cracks and not get the care that they deserve. And so, I think kind of looking back on my career, I've sort of, every time I see an opportunity where I can help people on a broader level, I've taken that step to the best that I can. And I just see now there's a lot of opportunity in, estate and elder law to educate people and advocate for people on a broader level. And so that's really, I'm just taking that passion, into another area.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that. You really come at it with a compassionate point of view too. I love that. In episode 41, so a few episodes back, my gal pal Stella Capicelli Carter, she and I were talking about taking care of yourself while taking care of aging parents. She's ahead of me on this journey. But from your experience, personally and professionally, how important is self-care as a caregiver? And what does that really look like in practical terms?
Yeah, gosh, that episode was so good. Listening to you and Stella talk. Oh, I mean, so I have two thoughts. The first thing is what stood out for me in that episode with Stella was when she talked about the emotions, right, that come along with caregiving, and some of them even surprise us, right? Like we're not expecting the array of emotions that we're going to experience. And so I do want to reiterate something that she said, which is that if you've never done therapy before, now is the time, right? Because
sign yourself
up. We are going to have to face and work through those emotions as they come. We can't bury them. Things like fear and grief and resentment. These are very unpleasant and often surprising emotions that arise during this process, and if we bury them and we don't face them, they're going to become a ticking time bomb. And so again, talking about pre-planning, right? Like we have to plan for how we're going to process these emotions, and we need to work through them as they arise, and just honor them and recognize them and then let them go so they don't fester during this time in our life. So I did want to reiterate that. But the other thing I'll say, I say this to caregiving audiences all the time, is that self-care, it's not the buzzword that we think of. It's not about lattes and spa days, right? Like those things are nice. Sure, we'd all like to have them more often. But most of the time, even if we wanted to, we don't have the time for that, And so we have to embrace that self-care is really more about those daily consistent choices to take care of ourselves and prioritize our physical and mental health. It's the cliches of you can't pour from an empty cup, or you have to put the air mask on in the plane before you can put someone else's on. I mean, those we really have to recognize those are cliches, but they're true and they're very applicable in the caregiving season. We just have to make good choices for ourselves. We have to prioritize, the things that keep us grounded. Journaling, time in nature, prayer, and meditation. And one thing I like to emphasize is that sometimes we have to say no to things in order to make room for these other things, right? Like we have to hold these things sacred, whatever it is for you that keeps your cup filled. As caregivers, we're so used to just being yes men and just doing what everyone else needs us to do. But sometimes you're going to have to turn down an offer or an ask or an opportunity so that you can hold that time sacred. So just making sure that you build in time for those things, that you keep it, that you honor it, and that you're just always prioritizing your own mental health, physical and mental health on a day-to-day basis.
I love that you said daily choices too. I just finished a series called Renew for Resilience, which is the idea of looking at different areas of our lives as women, and what can we do to renew them, make some tweaks, right? And again and again, what I heard, and these were, by the way, these are areas like home organization and what you're eating and training and exercise and looking at your finances, and looking at how you can lighten your toxic load, and all of those ended up coming down to making tweaks about your daily choices.
That's right.
And a lot of little tweaks can add up.
Absolutely.
to a groundedness, or a solid sister, or just simply overall just taking care of yourself better. Now, I would add that you can take a little more time, maybe once a month, to go to a nail salon and pamper yourself there. Okay. I'm just a little biased to that. It doesn't necessarily take as much as a big spa day, right? And there's a lot of places you can drop in. And I want to wrap up our time together with talking about nail color again. I always ask my guests, if you could create a nail color name that would inspire us, and in this case, to not be afraid of caregiving and be the best caregiver we can be to a care recipient, in my case, aging parents, what would that name be?
So I came up with Perfectly Imperfect.
Perfectly Imperfect. That fits a lot of situations, but why this
one? Well, caregivers are a special breed. And, not only are they used to always taking care of others, but oftentimes they are perfectionists. Raising my hand, I am guilty as charged. And I don't really know why this is, why so many caregivers fall into that category. But it's a dangerous trap, being a caregiver and being a perfectionist. And so we have to get comfortable that we are not going to be perfect as caregivers. And doing so is not important. That's not what your care recipient needs from you. They don't need you to be perfect. They need you to care. They need you to have compassion, and all the other things, are going to work themselves out if we just stay grounded in that place. And so I just want caregivers to kind of give up the notion of being perfect and just realize that that's not our calling. We're called to serve and love others, and it really has nothing to do with perfectionism.
That's powerful. I love what you said. They don't need you to be perfect. They need you to care.
Yeah.
That's coming from someone who's been in a caregiving role of some type and at some level since almost 12 years old. That's powerful. Thank you.
It's a hard lesson to learn.
It
takes time.
You're still working on it, right?
I'm still working on it.
That's another challenge. This has just been so educating, so encouraging for me personally. I hope it's been encouraging for every gal listening who is either in the caregiving journey or is knowing that it's out there, and in fact can also give a little oomph to do some planning for whoever might be caregiving to you. So
Yeah.
you think ahead in that way. For those who would like to reach out to you, to connect with you, maybe get a copy of your book. And by the way, I'm going to put a copy of your book. You can get it on Amazon, Caregiving with Confidence. I'll put a link in the show notes. All right.
Yeah.
So
Mhm.
for that, for sure. But how can people get in touch with you?
Yeah. So, right now I'm preparing to go to law school. So I am making that career pivot.
Wow.
Yeah. So I'll start in August on that journey. So right now I'm not actively providing any kind of consulting services or care management through my company, the Aging Authority, but I am preparing a summer webinar series, an educational webinar series that's going to be coming hopefully in May or maybe early June in partnership with the Knowledgeable Aging Learning Center. So that'll be coming to my website. That's a way that there will be an interactive component there that people will be able to join and take advantage of this summer. And I don't. Who knows what I'm going to get into in my free
Right.
time while I'm in law school. But of course, I have the book that people can read. I'll have this series coming up. So if you want to follow what I'm doing, the best way to do that is to go to theagingauthority.com, and all the links and all my updates will be there.
Excellent. All right. So agingauthority.com. And we can hopefully, if we'll look there for the webinar series.
Yeah,
And when it
absolutely.
gets finalized. And sounds like we ought to jump on that opportunity because that's happening before you're going to be consumed
Yeah,
law
well,
school
that's the idea.
and caregiving yourself and being a wife and being a mother, and that's a lot right there. I'm
Yeah,
really
I'm
glad
getting
you
ready
wrote
for
the
a
book
new
then.
season.
Okay, you've written a book. It's out. This book came out within the last year. In fact, September, I believe, of 2022. So that was your gift to us while you're now getting law school, so you can be even more powerful for those in elder law. So good for you. Congrats on that.
Thank you, Mary. I appreciate it.
This has been fun. All right.
So
Thank you
much fun.
so
Thank you
much
for
fun.
having me.
You're welcome. All right. We'll talk again soon. And now for the after party, I call Flip the Chip, where I take a few moments to highlight something my gal pals share that can help us all flip a challenge or a difficulty that's holding us back into something more positive that helps us move forward. What I want to highlight today are Pamela's top 5 tips for caregivers. They're easy to remember because they spell GUESS, GUESS, and start to take that guesswork out of how to begin your caregiving journey. So G, get organized. Disorganization is the root of so many problems for caregivers. Help your care recipient get their legal, financial, and medical affairs in order now. It will be a huge relief for later. You understand your care recipient. Get your arms around the immediate and long-term needs of the person you're caring for. As a caregiver, you will frequently be in positions where you must provide information and answer questions. E, educate yourself. Research and find ways to increase your knowledge on effective caregiving strategies in advance so that you know what to expect. The more tools and resources you have, the better equipped you will be, and the easier you can adapt as things change, because they will. S, set boundaries. Be realistic about how much of your time and energy you can expend on caregiving. It is vital to set clear limits and communicate them to your care recipients and family members. And then the final S in GUESS, seek support. Don't tackle this alone. Trust me. Ask family or friends to take on specific tasks to ease the burden. If you don't have local support, seek help from churches, caregiving support groups, civic organizations, or senior support services. Calling the local area agency on aging is an excellent place to start. By the way, they're all over the United States. So just Google Area Agency on Aging. You can dive into each of these tips more in Pamela's book, Caregiving with Confidence, Taking the Guesswork Out of Caregiving. And of course, you can also use your nail color to cheer you on by simply putting on a new nail color and giving it the name Perfectly Imperfect, as Pamela suggested, so that every time you look at your fingers or toes, you're reminded that in your caregiving journey, the one you're helping doesn't need you to be perfect. They need you to care. You can make good choices to create the career, business, and life you want, one step, one nail color at a time. I look forward to being with you next time on the Live Like Your Nail Color podcast.
Thanks for listening to the Live Like Your Nail Color podcast. Ready to live and laugh more? Know a friend who could use some of that too? Then subscribe at liveLikeYourNailColor.com or your favorite podcast app and share this episode right now with the person who popped into your mind. Together, let's flip the chip to be stronger, smarter, and happier.